Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Elixir of Specialty Coffee. Looks like whiskey, feels like tea, made from coffee and unlike anything you've ever tasted before. Head to elixirspecialtycoffee.com and enter code IMAPITFORWARD to receive 10% off your first order today. Today on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, we are going through some research as promised in the last episode of the Daily Coffee Pro about minimum wage. And there was a study that was sent to me by my friend Clancy Kramer. And the study is released from the School of Hospitality and Tourism Management from Purdue University in Indiana. And it was done by Hong Sun Kim and Su Cheong Jang. And this was a study that looked at what happened if you increased minimum wage. Now, if you want to get access to the study, go to our Telegram group. And that is at t.me/mapitforwardmastermind. We're going to talk about it a lot in that group today. But I wanted to talk about what they were looking for and what they were trying to figure out by this and kind of tie it back to what we've experienced in the coffee industry. So this study was specifically looking at the effects of increasing minimum wage in the restaurant industry here in the US, where a minimum wage is federally at $7.25, and it's been that for nearly a decade. And what they were trying to look at is if you increase the minimum wage, what does that do to productivity within workplaces in the restaurant industry? So, the way that minimum wage has worked, it was established here in 1933, and at that time it was the minimum wage as set by what's called the FLSA, which is the National Industrial Recovery Act, was at 25 cents. And in 1938, that was kind of solidified and enforced as the minimum wage here in America. Then in 1949, it went up to 75 cents an hour as the minimum wage. In 1961, it was $1.15, and then it kept going up. And in 2009, it was at $7.25. This is federally, remember, and it hasn't moved since then. Now, in every state, also, it's important to note that in every state, they have their own minimum wage. And so the minimum wage is not all states have their own minimum wage laws, but for those states that do, sometimes they're different. For example, here in California, the minimum wage is at about $13 and it is heading upwards. 2020, it will be $15. In Seattle, it's $15. And so when you have the difference between the federal minimum wage and the state minimum wage, the highest of the two of those is the mandated minimum wage that you can pay anyone in that state. So here, at the moment, the minimum wage that you can pay someone is $13 or $13.50. I'm not sure. I don't pay minimum wage. I pay above minimum wage. But I think it's $13.50, and that will increment up as we go. And so 2020, it's going to be $15 here in California, and they've been planning that for the last few years. And employers, particularly in the coffee industry that I've been talking about, are really concerned about how their businesses are going to survive when that minimum wage goes up. And so that's why I'm super excited to be talking about this because of some of the findings of this particular article. Now, the point of this article, as they stated, number one, review minimum wage in the US. 2, empirically investigate relationships between minimum wage and productivity. And 3, empirically investigate how outcomes of minimum wage differ by restaurant type and wage level. That's really important, that third one. Now, when you look at the difference between the way cafes are run here in the US and how they're run in other countries, and I can take Australia, for example, that's where I was raised in the coffee industry. What they're talking about in number 3, the empirical investigation of how outcomes of minimum wage differ between restaurant type and wage level. So restaurant type is interesting here because what they talk about is full service restaurants and what was the term that they used for it? And limited service restaurants. And so a limited service restaurant is where you walk up to a counter and you pay for your coffee or your food before you're given your coffee or your food. And a full service restaurant is where you sit at a table and you receive your food and your coffee after ordering at a table, and the check is brought to your table and you pay there. Now, the two distinctions are really important because there was a significant outcome in this study of what they observed in relationship to minimum wage. And we'll talk about that in a second. I do want to let you know that while the outcome of this doesn't seem to be as favorable as what we would want, we could learn a lot from this data in the way that we progress forward in the way we practice business and paying people in our industry. And it may be formative for some people as to how they're going to structure their businesses as they move forward. Now, something that they found is that for places that pay more than minimum wage, there was this thing called the spillover effect. So if you pay more than minimum wage, the spillover effect isn't just that you get a more than minimum wage. What they actually found is that when you pay minimum wage, the spillover effect is that it gives the rest of the workforce incentive to work harder. So the unskilled workforce is given incentive to work harder in order to attain a higher minimum wage, a higher than minimum wage. It should be noted here that another part of the minimum wage with regards to the restaurant industry, the coffee industry, so the tipping culture, basically. In 1966, the FSLA amended the Act to establish a tip credit system, and that was that employers can pay a reduced minimum wage to employees who receive regularly greater than $30 at a minimum worth of tips every month. And they fixed that minimum wage to $2.13 per hour and plus tips. However, if an employee didn't achieve a $7.25 minimum hourly rate over the month, once they'd included their tips on top of the $2.13 per hour, the employer had to make up the difference. So what they found, going back to what I was just saying about the spillover effect, what they found was that if you paid higher than a minimum wage in the restaurant industry, and we are including the coffee industry in the restaurant industry, what you ended up finding was that the workforce will naturally gravitate towards your business, which makes sense, but this is the science and the evidence behind it. And the spillover effect of that is that unskilled labor that you have working for you that is just resting on minimum wage will always work harder to achieve the higher wage rate because they've incentivized to do so. Now, equity theory is a part of this study as well. And it's an important part of understanding the organizational psychology behind what motivates staff. So essentially, people tend to compare their own efforts, or what they call in this study as an input. So people tend to compare their own input, which is effort or skills, and outcome, which is their pay, with the inputs and outcomes of others. And so what that means is that people will consider the way that they are paid in comparison, or the fairness of the way that they're paid in comparison to those around them and in the industry. So, based on the equity theory, you end up with what's called a fair wage efforts hypothesis. And it's a little difficult to understand, but once you've carved away at the maths, what they're saying is that if you want maximum effort from your employees, you will get that if you pay them more than or the same as what they perceive to be a fair value. Okay, so you can dissect the article if you want to understand the maths behind it, go ahead and do it. But basically what they're saying is if you want to get increased productivity, again, maximum effort from your employees, you need to figure out what the perceived fair amount they think they should be getting for their efforts, their input, and the output, their pay. If it's equal or more than that, that is how you will get maximum productivity or maximum effort from your employees. So I'm sure that doesn't sound revolutionary, but now we've got some science behind it. The effect of minimum wage on productivity. So employees' attitudes and satisfaction and the way that the resulting behavior from everything that they're doing is what's going to influence organizational performance. So if they have better pay, training, and job security, you end up with employees whose internal and external needs are met. And so that's how you end up with enhanced employee satisfaction. Now, here's where it gets interesting. As minimum wage increases happen, people keep asking the question, if I increase the minimum wage of what I'm paying, how long, if at all, will I see a return on investment for my business? Now, because I invest all this money in training and all these extra stuff that I give my employees, and I never end up seeing a return on investment for that. And this whole system of increasing minimum wage and then providing training and job security and everything that comes with that, which we as employers are constantly becoming quite annoyed that we invest in our people and then they fuck off and go somewhere else. This whole system is called a chained process, and that chained process requires a long-term vision to reap the rewards, because often the short-term investments that we make as employers, the benefits are directly received and reaped by the employee. The long-term effects of that, as shown by this study, are absolutely received by the employer. And long-term means 2 years. So what they've found through the studies that they've done, through the analysis that they've done on the data that they collected, was that en masse, the restaurant industry, what in Australia would be termed as the hospitality industry, minimum wage has a 1-year lagged effect on prices in the US from 1975 to 1995. Now, what they're referring to here is part of the study where what they said was that if you do all this, you pay your employees better and you give them training and you ensure their job security, you end up ensuring that you satisfy their needs internally and externally. And in turn, the employee goes on to enhance customer satisfaction. And how customer satisfaction is measured is through them returning, repeat business. They use word of mouth to tell other people about you, and they're willing to pay premiums for things. Now, what they've found is that the longer that you lag behind increasing wages, the longer it will take you to reap the rewards of what you could be reaping when you do increase your wages. The caveat to this is that they found that this was particularly so in full service restaurants. So if you're running a cafe that is full service, you will maximize your benefits of increasing wages more so than for limited service places. But here's the thing. They found that there was a time mechanism that was involved in this. So there were 3 conclusions from this study. And again, if you want to read more about it, head to our Telegram profile, and the study is in there. You can read about it. You can talk more about it in there with the group, the new Telegram group that we've started at t.me/map-it-forward mastermind. But here were the 3 conclusions that they came up with from this study. Increasing minimum wage immediately increases productivity in the restaurant industry. There's a positive impact for 2 years. And then after that, the impact is diminished. But what they also found was if you then give another wage increase, that extends the impact for another 2-year cycle. It was only full service businesses experience long-term minimum wage effect, while limited service restaurants experience no significant minimum wage effect on productivity. So this means that if you're able somehow through this study, and they go on to say in the limitation section of the study that there's not enough evidence that could help show the mechanisms of how this could be changed, but if you can somehow shift the model of your business to incorporate both full service and limited service, so perhaps you do limited service for takeaways, full service for dine-ins, what you end up finding is that you may reap the rewards of some of these things by simply increasing the wage for those who are on a flat minimum wage structure, minimum wage plus tips. So the final thing that they found is that there is a positive effect only experienced for low wage restaurants. So what they mean by that is if you pay only minimum wage, we're not talking about cafes that are paying like $10 above minimum wage. We're talking about cafes that are paying the absolute minimum wage. And if you paid simply increasing $1, so if you're paying $1 above minimum wage and all you've done is paid minimum wage before, the bump in salary or the bump in wages would significantly result in increased productivity. Whereas if you gave someone who was earning $20 an hour a bump of $1, they didn't recognize that wage increase anywhere near as much. It didn't result in as big a productivity bump. So I'm trying to get these folks that wrote this study to come on the podcast so that we can have a long chat with them about what they found and what they hope to investigate further. This is a legit study. It's from a major university in Indiana here in the States, from one of the best hospitality schools in the country. So I'm going to see what I can find out from them and get some more information if we can. This was just a kind of deep dive into, well, not a deep dive, but just an unpacking of the results that I found. And I'd love to hear more about what your thoughts are about minimum wage. It's something that we constantly are discussing in our industry about how we get better at paying people, how we find that delicate balance between recognizing the people who work in our industry and motivating them to show up to work and give 100% while still trying to manage the very high labor costs that we've got in our industry. Come to Telegram and let's start a conversation. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.